The U.S. and China addressed the United Nations yesterday, announcing separate efforts to combat climate change. China pledged to stop funding coal plants abroad, while the U.S. plans to double climate aid for poorer nations by 2024. China and the U.S. are the two largest polluters, with China emitting 27% of the world's greenhouse gases. In 2019, the U.S. emitted 11%.
Despite China's efforts abroad, China itself is still heavily reliant on coal power. Reports from late August detail its plans to build 43 new coal-fired power plants and 18 new blast furnaces, adding another 1.5% of carbon emissions to its current annual score. These plans were announced after the nation pledged to bring emissions to a peak by 2030 and make the country carbon neutral by 2060. Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman and culture editor at The Federalist, Emily Jashinsky, join us to discuss. Emily, what's going on with China? How are they explaining adding coal-fired capacity to their energy infrastructure while pushing to go carbon neutral?
No, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think actually it is the question. We can have these conversations until we're blue in the face here in the United States, and there's only so much that we can do as an individual country when you have China and India, which are places that we need to worry about immensely. And so for China to say that they expect to peak by 2030, and then on the other hand, to see the ramping up actually of the use of coal in certain cases, I mean, it's like, how's the math going to work out here? And it's an incredibly important question to ask, because we can change we can change our country, we can change the way that we do business here, we can get rid of jobs, we can take drastic measures. But it really doesn't matter unless we have solid cooperation on this from China and India and other places that are actually polluting disproportionately.
Well, Andrew, let me put a different version of that to you. So Peter DeFazio, the chair of the Transportation Committee, just yesterday called the bipartisan infrastructure plan that Congress is working on just a bunch of garbage put together by fossil fuel-loving bipartisan senators. He talked about how it insisted that they threw out his electric bus program and insisted that a huge portion of the new buses that would be purchased would be fossil fuels. And like writing fossil fuels into the law. So if the Chinese are looking at the United States, they'd say, look, this is your allegedly left-wing party who says they care about climate change. They're passing an infrastructure bill that the Transportation Committee chairman says could have been written by the fossil fuel industry. So is nobody serious here?
Sometimes that's what it feels like, Ryan. And I think Peter DeFazio, even in a district that where he faces a tough re-election, speaks truth to power. And I commend him on that. I mean, the reality is we're still fighting not only in the infrastructure bill, but in reconciliation to get it so fossil fuel companies aren't getting subsidies anymore, right? I mean, that is a big argument right now. So there's definitely, on China front, seems to be some hypocrisy, and on our front, seems to be some hypocrisy. But I think we're more serious in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, carbon emissions before 2030. It's surprising to me that you are seeing, well, I don't know if surprising is the right word, but concerning that you see China looking to ramp up over the next 10 years rather than start to ramp down. It is a progress, I think, that they are going to stop investing in coal plants overseas, but clearly a lot more to be done here.
And the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke to the Associated Press this weekend ahead of this week's annual United Nations gathering of world leaders, urging China and the United States to repair their completely dysfunctional relationship, warning of a potential new Cold War. During an interview with Bloomberg, Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry was questioned about Uyghur internment camps in China and whether the administration is trading climate for human rights. Let's watch.
Another issue related to China is importing of solar panels, because clearly a priority of the Biden administration is really addressing climate, but it's not the only priority. There are other things as well, such as the Uyghur situation in the West. What is the process by which one trades off climate against human rights?
Well, life, life is always full of tough choices in the relationship between nations.
I mean, it's true. Life is full of tough choices, but certainly there's a way that we could hold China accountable on human rights, as well as addressing climate change. But, to Emily's point, this is the frustration I think that many feel is even under the Paris Climate Accords, for example, China was looped into our efforts, but did virtually nothing to actually lower their carbon emissions. And then in the U.S., there's, efforts on the left and some on the right to take drastic stances that could wipe out entire industries over time to try to get to a place to address our climate issues when the greatest offenders on the planet are doing very little. How is there a diplomatic solution? And I'll pose this to Andrew. Is there a diplomatic way that we can actually encourage China to do more? Because to me, the promises we're hearing at the UN, it just seems like kind of hollow from the Chinese.
Look, when it comes to diplomatic solutions, I do believe that Joe Biden is someone with a lot of expertise on this. Regardless of what you think of all of his foreign policy moves, he has long history with foreign leaders and good relationships and good standing with them.
That's
so I
true.
do think
he does have a long history with China.
I knew I just gave you threw you something, Emily. But I do think here, just to wrap here, that I don't think John Kerry was very eloquent in saying that, what he says that there are tough choices. It is true there are tough choices, but I think it's a false choice that we have to pick one, the Uyghur situation or the climate crisis. I think we can address both. But it's not, we need to see more than just words and rhetoric. We actually need to see accountability and action. And, look, that's up to the Biden administration to actually hold them accountable. And I think they're committed to doing that. We just have to see, how this all shakes out.
And Emily, to put specifics on what you're talking about there, Hunter Biden famously flew on Air Force Two while Joe Biden was vice president, and was able to introduce a potential an ultimate business partner of his to the vice president, which is of incalculable value, to a Chinese business person. We've since got confirmation that the email that involved this now defunct company that said 10% for the big guy what was actually authentic. We also know separately that the Chinese kind of ruling class felt like because there wasn't enough of a link between the American elite and Donald Trump, that they had less ability to get a message across to him, to lobby him, to push him, and they were hoping that they would have that ability with the Biden administration. Do you think those hopes are coming to fruition?
It's one of the things with the Biden situation is that we may not know if those hopes are coming to fruition because there may be stuff that goes on behind closed doors with lobbyists, et cetera, that we don't know about right now. And it's not showing up in our policy yet. And it may. And that's something to pay attention to because you actually couldn't write a character in a movie that is more sort of perfectly suited for exactly what you were just talking about, Ryan, the Chinese elite wanting a partner in America than Joe Biden, somebody who actually does talk at least tough towards China and has had some policies that I completely agree with towards China. But at the same time, his son, Hunter, and his own dealings with his son, I think you shouldn't give Americans a ton of confidence that he doesn't have some conflicts of interest going on. And, we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. I think it's still too early to tell. But there's been at least tough talk on that front. And to Andrew's point, it may be a false choice. It may be, but it's the false choice that the Biden administration believes is a real choice. And they are actually, it's like to John Kerry saying life is full of tough choices. That's actually great. Be open about it. If you're making that choice, if you do believe that it's one or the other, tell us, because then we can say exactly as Andrew just said, it's a false choice. You don't have to pick one or the other. It seems outrageous. And the other thing, when we talk about just quickly the human rights situation in China, what's happening to the Uyghurs is terrible. That's not China's only human rights abuse. This is a country that is constantly committing human rights abuses. And America has been too permissive of it for too long.
Well, and another tough choice that John Kerry often has to face is whether to fly commercial or on his private jet while lecturing everyone else about climate emissions. But with that, thank you guys so much for joining us, Andrew
You're
and Emily.
clearly a big fan of John Kerry.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll have more Rising after this.